Joe and Kateri were married on the Seminole Reservation, and Little Bear was born a few months later with brown skin and blue eyes. The chief believed Little Bear was the reincarnation of his father, and the pain the chief had endured for nearly 20 years began to fade away. The baby gave the chief's life a sense of purpose. He began to feel like a whole person for the first time since his father's assassination. They kicked back to the reservation for a while after the baby was born. Then the chief wanted to make some money, so they moved to Fort Lauderdale. Joe was satisfied to be a husband and father. Little Bear made him want to stay away from violence enough to keep his gun belt hidden away on the sergeant's boat, which was docked in the canal behind their house. Joe hoped he would never need the peacemaker again, but he checked on it frequently for sentimental reasons. Times had changed a lot, and the chief could no longer get away with wearing his gun belt in public, but he enjoyed wearing it in private. Sometimes when he and Kateri were alone on the boat, he would strap on the belt and practice drawing the king-size revolver, spinning it on his finger before returning it to the holster. One time a fast boat went by while the chief was spinning his Colt. The gun fired and Kateri screamed. The chief was relieved when he realized the bullet had gone through the ceiling. He could have accidentally killed his wife or put a hole in the bottom of the boat. Joe felt bad about not getting any practice with his weapons. On the reservation in the Everglades, he could get away with shooting his Colt and throwing his tomahawk, but there weren't too many places he could do that in Fort Lauderdale. Though he was happy to keep his weapons away from his son, he understood that they were an important part of his heritage. Without them, he would not be alive to teach his son to stay away from violence. To make money, the chief opened a rock and roll club called the Watering Hole. Once his new tribe started to form, it became known as the Chief's Watering Hole. Although a lot of high-rolling gamblers hung out at the club, college students made up a big part of the clientele. The chief liked having lots of young women there because they drew in the men who spent the money. As a result, the chief's watering hole was one of the most happening places in town, but the chief got arrested frequently for selling alcohol to minors. In Cuba, Fidel Castro had copped a bad attitude toward the chief, and Rico really wanted the chief to suffer for the damage to his shoulder. Campanero had also tracked the chief down to Cuba and had worked his way in with Castro. Before long, Campanero was trading firearms for alcohol and tobacco and encouraging Fidel to kill the chief. Sergeant Duffy had the ATF on Campanero's case, but Campanero stayed a step ahead of them. As soon as Campanero found out the chief was in Fort Lauderdale, he convinced the local police department that Joe was using his airplane to smuggle alcohol and tobacco. However, when the cops boarded the plane, they were surprised to find it loaded with lobster. The chief had been buying lobsters in the Bahamas for $1 a pound and selling them in Florida for $1.95. His plane held about 500 pounds and he usually made one trip a week. The Fort Lauderdale Police Department was becoming a problem for the chief. They were convinced he was selling untaxed alcohol and tobacco to the Seminoles. They viewed him as a criminal and they were trying to shut him down by charging him with anything they could. One day, Joe and Gator were teaching Blackjack the ropes at the watering hole while Kateri and Jenny took care of Little Bear in the house, which was a lot of work because there were so many people. On any given night, they might have to prepare food for 10 or 15 people. There was no telling who the chief would bring home with him. Joe was teaching his teenage brother how to put English on a cue ball. Gator was standing by the chief's side with a bottle of beer in his hand when Mike Duffy, another one of the sergeant's adopted kids, entered the pool room. The chief looked up from the table as Blackjack shot.
"Mike, my man. What's up, brother?"
Joe moved quickly around the table and slapped palms with Mike. They shook hands firmly and patted shoulders as they looked each other up and down.
"Man, you got big."
Mike grinned with a toothpick in his mouth, surrounded by his thick brown beard and mustache.
"You too, brother. Putting on a little weight, aren't you?"
"Gator, come here. You gotta meet Mike," said Joe.
He was in tight with your old man. We all fought together. You must be Kahatchi's kid, Mike asked, reaching out his hand. Gator smiled as they shook hands. Blackjack, get over here and meet Mike, Joe called to his brother. We spilled blood all over each other in Korea. He's my blood brother. Mike immediately moved into the house with Joe and Kateri. He couldn't believe how beautiful Kahatchi's daughter was and frequently joked that Little Bear was lucky to look like her, not like his father or grandfather.